All right. Well, again, welcome everybody. It's been an interesting period since the last time we met in I believe it was November. And I ran across this quote. I'm not even sure how I found it. I found it was in the Financial Times back in March, just a few days into what for most of us kind of became the reality of the pandemic. And Mr. Harari, who you know from the book *Sapiens*, perhaps wrote this, and it's somewhat prophetic that he was able to suggest that short-term emergency measures were being pushed forward very quickly, and this certainly all these are quotes from that paper in the Financial Times that really kind of hits home in terms of the American Board of Radiology. I'm sure many of your institutions, things that are completely unrelated to the board exam, have taken on the same character. And that is that innovation is accelerated. And what we see here is, if you look at the very final line, the risks of doing nothing, of course, in this case, were bigger than the risks of trying some innovative changes. And for us, they're exciting, but at the same time, I'm sure, as you're finding in your own institutions, can be somewhat stressful. So with that background, we also shared recently with the board some of the complexity. This is just with respect to the computer-based exams. It doesn't really relate to the oral exams at all. And it's only a partial list. You can see it cuts off in early December, and we've been working really hard since that time, and of course before this started as well. But just an excerpt from what this change involves. And I share this not so that you're terribly sympathetic to what we're going through, but so that you can convey to the residents and the people in your department that this is indeed more complicated than it seemed at the outset, and certainly more complicated than I anticipated. And we knew from our colleagues on other boards that these remote exam processes were exceedingly more complicated than what certainly the candidates themselves would perceive. And we've learned that certainly along the way. So I'm going to separate this into three key elements. Really the communication, and specifically communication with candidates. In this case, we have exam guides we put out in December, both for the pilot exam that took place just a few days ago and for the core exam. We also have some tutorial videos that are designed to guide the candidate through the process, the idea being to try and anticipate what it is they want to know. What we would want to know if we were sitting down for the examination, and those have been refined and fine-tuned. But the idea is so that people can be familiar with the platform, so that there's nothing that's unexpected on exam day. And of course, phone support both in advance of the meeting, in advance of the exam, as well as during the exam. And the idea here again is to lend a helping hand if people are having trouble with the software, if people are having trouble during the exam. We certainly saw that this weekend, that we were available to guide candidates through the process. The other key element really was the software itself, and that includes the exam platform, which really isn't terribly different from what the candidates would have encountered in the exam center. There are a few minor adjustments because it's a remote exam now, but beyond that, the biggest change really, of course, is the security overlay. The fact that we're not in a directly proctored environment, and as we've announced previously, we're using a third-party vendor, Proctorio. Proctorio is, for us, they're using the artificial intelligence assisted model, which allows them to identify areas of concern during these webcam sessions, so that we can be sure that the candidates are playing by the rules, that basically there are no extra devices, that there is not opening a textbook or their iPad or something. So and it's working fairly well, as I'll report in just a few minutes, based on what we learned on Saturday. It is very good. It's not perfect, and we admit that. In fact, Proctorio itself as a company has a lot of experience, and as we went through the process, as I reported to this group on our prior sessions, we were comfortable they were the best option for us, and in fact, overall have done a terrific job working with us on this. It's not completely perfect. We did run into some minor problems with the room scan, I think just because people don't understand exactly what it's intended to do, and we're going to work on that communication here in just the next week or so for the core candidates. It's not intuitive, and if you've not done it before, it's difficult to do, but as I'll show in a moment, the practice exams are designed to let people learn how to basically document. Yes, I'm alone in a space. I don't have extra devices on my desk, and of course the ID check just to make sure that the person taking the exam is the person who's registered for the exam. The recording of the candidate, as I said, we're looking at that really for two purposes. One is remediation, and especially relevant in the core exam, which takes place over 6 sessions in 3 days. And the idea is that if we see a behavior by a candidate that looks, not quite what we'd like, we're not terribly suspicious, but we don't want it to be misperceived by the AI program nor by us. It gives us an opportunity to contact the candidate and just say, hey, could you redo that check of your desk just to show us that there was nothing prohibited, or could you refrain from basically going off camera if that's part of the behavior that we're seeing. So this is idea coaching, just to say, hey, we're not really concerned. It's just, for the next time, could you do this a little better? And then beyond that, the determination, basically, if we look at the recording and kind of say, well, that's behavior we can't explain away at all, and we're not going to take that lightly. It's going to require multiple steps in our own process. I expect this to be extremely rare, and we may, in fact, not even see an incident of this where we would be forced to consider invalidating an exam, and that's going to be obviously a major step for us if we wind up doing that. But that's after the fact, in large measure. That is the determination that this exam can't be scored because we don't think it's valid. And we've encountered that actually in our exam centers on occasion. Certainly when we've had the oral exams, we've had candidates checking a cell phone in between sessions or things like that. Extremely rare, and we expect that would be rare in this remote environment as well. But this is sort of why we're doing it. The idea is to make sure that ultimately we have a valid exam, and we'd like to do these two things: remediate, and then on those rare occasions, use it as a determination that indeed we had concerns enough that were that required some sort of action after the fact. And then logistics. So we talked about the communication, also the software, and now logistics. Practice exams, I think, are sort of the tool that really makes this work for the candidates. And it's an opportunity to confirm that the software, both that Proctorio security overlay as well as the exam platform itself, that it works, and that it works on that device, on that network. And this is critical. So we've advised our candidates in the exam guides, been pretty clear about this, that don't test it in one location and then take the exam in a different location. You want to make sure you're on the same network that you intended to use, and test it out. And the good news, of course, is there's really no limit to how many times they can log in. So if they change their mind, well, I'm not going to take the test here, I'm going to take it somewhere else, log in again, and they can do that several times. There's no limit to how many times the individuals can try it out before exam day with that goal. I want it to be comfortable on the day of the exam, and I want them to be confident that the system will work for them on that day. And thus far, this has been, I think, well received. People understand the purpose of it. It allows them to test out the image tools, magnification, brightness, contrast, etc. Also in the logistics realm, we have, of course, our customer service and IT support, and we're going to ramp that up, of course, for the core with more candidates than we had this past Saturday. And so on Saturday, what we did is we had approximately 160 candidates. These were for certification, right? This is for their certification exam. So these are individuals who are about a year and a half beyond completion of training. And in the morning, there was a session on the essentials of radiology, and then there were 3 self-selected clinical modules, the same exact content we would have used in the past for the certification exam. And these were individuals, of course, who were scheduled from last year because of COVID. We did find that poor lighting in the room, and interestingly, and not that anyone could have predicted this, on the East Coast, as the sun was going down, we actually had individuals, I think, who started off kind of like I am now, perhaps at midday, and by the time the exam was done, it was late afternoon on the East Coast, and it was getting dark, and we had trouble. The software had trouble kind of saying, okay, we're having trouble identifying the kinds of things that the software is designed to pick up. Is there a chance that the person's looking off screen in order to use a second device or to use notes, et cetera? It really wasn't a major issue, just something that I would argue, we're a little surprised by. We didn't expect that we'd see this and it was really only a handful of times, not a major concern, but just something we're going to keep an eye on in the future. There were very few connectivity issues, which was a relief because we had no way to really predict this. We did have, I believe it was fewer than 5 people who had low bandwidth that would show up during the course of the exam. And it would kick them out and then basically to log back in and everything was fine. Obviously a little disconcerting to the candidate, but it worked, meaning that no one failed to complete the exam because of a bandwidth issue. And we had approximately 50%. This is a very rough guess because it was hard to tell actually, but about 50% seemed like they were taking it in a hospital or their office. Remember, these are postgraduate, they're beyond graduation. And about the other half, or maybe even a little more, were taking it at home. I mean, we could tell by the environment they were in their house and or apartment. So given that there really weren't major concerns with bandwidth, even though a large portion of our 160 candidates were taking it with the same Wi-Fi that you have where you live, and that was a relief, and I think should be a relief to the candidates as well. Now we did have some issues, and again, less than 5 out of 160 that had sort of difficult issues with the hospital network or their firewall. And this was based on the security certificate that would be basically updated and might allow the candidate to log in the first time and not the second time. And IT right now is working on a document that we'll release before the end of the week that would be designed for your IT staff at your institution if indeed you intend to have your residents take the exam in your department. So these were individuals working off the hospital network. It worked at first and then it didn't, and a handful of people. We actually only had one individual who we could not recover and get back to complete the exam. I will admit too that a couple of the individuals who did have problems apparently reached in their briefcase, took out their laptop and converted to public network or some equivalent of a public network in order to not have to deal with a firewall issue. But these were all people who got in initially and then couldn't get in subsequently to the exam. So the question, unfortunately for the program directors, I wish there were a definite answer where I would say, the bandwidth in individuals' homes and apartments is not going to be adequate for a large number of people. Therefore, do everything you can to give the exam in your departments in, as we said previously, private offices with the door closed, et cetera, versus, kind of weighing that now against the fact that we actually saw at least as many problems or perhaps more with firewall issues that were built around the hospital network, which gets back to something we had proposed a meeting or two ago with this audience, and that was perhaps the best solution is that faculty office in your department, but using a device that is connected to the public Wi-Fi where the firewall issues presumably are a little less restrictive. I can't answer for your department, but what we're going to be doing, as I say, within the next few days, definitely before the end of the week, is releasing some guidance for that you can share with your IT staff in order to say, well, this is how it works. It's just a Chrome plugin. It shouldn't be a problem, but of course your system, the firewall may recognize it as a problem, even though it really shouldn't be a security issue. Just to recap our timeline, we will be giving, of course, the core the first 2 weeks of February. This is for the R4 candidates. There's about 1,430 of them. And these will include, of course, people for both DR and for IRDR. Those results should be out by March 10th. And that's more rapid than we've done in the past. We're going to look for ways to make sure we can get it done by then, because, of course, these same people who they would have struggled with the exam and need to consider taking it again in June, they want to know as soon as possible. So we're going to get that result out quickly. In April, we have a wide range of computer-based exams, not just for diagnostic radiology and interventional radiology, but also for the qualifying events for medical physics and radiation oncology, which we're working on, of course, parallel to the diagnostic radiology exams. And then in early June, we'll just do it one more time. And of course, this group is for the current R3s. And again, a little over 1,400 candidates would be examined at that time. Now, we do have the fall administration as well for many of these exams. So it's not as if it ends in June, but at least that gets us kind of caught up to where we should be, right? Because by then we would have examined everyone who was to be examined on the diagnostic radiology side of things by that time.